missing from these conversations, or whether you've had the opportunity to engage with people who don't look, sound, or appear like those immediately around you at your local Rotary Club. And that's kind of one of the driving forces behind DEI efforts, which we'll get really into pretty soon. I want to kind of frame this discussion with an article that recently came, well, in August, not that recent anymore, but that recently came out from President Jennifer Jones, where she said it starts with an invitation, and in it, she really highlighted some of the same topics that we're going to discuss here today. Overall, it's essentially a DEI article that came out on the goals that she has for Rotary International and this Imagine Rotary theme that she's driving forward with her presidency. She really spent time highlighting the fact that we've done great recruiting for women in Rotary. And that's amazing, love that. In our own Rotary Club, we've seen numbers go drastically up in terms of diversifying with women. There are other areas that we're hoping to improve on, and I'm sure that's the same case with you and your Rotary Club. But the driving force behind these efforts is that we're hoping for new members, equitable opportunities, and an inclusive environment. And you can already see that these are directly in line with diversity, equity, and inclusion. She spells it out a little bit better than I can summarize right now, but if you haven't read the article, I highly encourage it. Long story short, DEI is defined pretty broadly, and again, the term, we're going to keep using it, so diversity, equity, and inclusion will be falling out of your mouth regularly today, I hope, and you'll hear it constantly. It's a term to describe policies and programs that promote the representation and participation of different groups, individuals, including people of different ages, races, and ethnicities, abilities, disabilities, genders, religions, cultures, and sexual orientations. That's a mouthful. So, to essentially, there's something missing here. No. I know. I'm great at memorizing things. Well, diversity is more than race. Essentially, that big statement that we pulled is highlighting some of the many areas that diversity hopes to pull from. And so the short end of it is that diversity is focusing on differences and finding people who are different to the typical Rotarian in our case. Equity is about providing equal access. And this image, which has circulated social media and news articles, magazines, done the Grand World Tour, and is one of Sarju's favorites. Feel free to highlight it, Sarju.
Well, what you can see here is if you've got everybody on equal footing, well then you still have some that can't look over the fence. Right? So equity is about leveling the playing field. So there's folks that have historically, over time, not had the same opportunities, and those folks need perhaps a second crate to stand on top of. Right? So that what we're talking about in terms of equity is putting everyone on the same playing field as opposed to giving people the same exact opportunity. Some people need that extra push to catch up.
This would be providing equal access. In a nutshell, that's what we're going for here. We've got the inclusion, which is about belonging, respect, and support. It's about fostering a sense of value and empowerment for those who have been welcomed into a space, community, in our case, Rotary Club. Rotary Club as a whole has a really dynamic place in our community. We really kind of sit in this multifaceted space of being a business that has, a financial element, a nonprofit, community service, and overall a networking or social aspect to it, which can sometimes blur the lines between business and social spectrums. So keeping that in mind, we look at DEI through a really unique lens. So again, I'm going to turn the question around for you guys. Does your club have a DEI committee? Just do this with a show of hands for me. Cool. keeping hands up if the following question is true. Does it need one? And then I'd love to, I don't know if we have a mic, but roaming the room. But I'd like to hear what goals it should have, which was one of the fundamental questions we looked at when we started our own.
Does someone want to volunteer what their DEI goals would be?
We have less we can. I think just conceptually that we represent or reflect the community which we would work and serve.
Perfect.
We didn't even tell her to say that.
It's not a plan. What about when your community isn't the most diverse? Do your goals change?
Gotcha.
We call ours a Jedi task force, which is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, because they really like Star Wars. So it makes them feel happy. I know that their goal is to bring more diversity to our club because we are not a traditionally very diverse club. And they've actually brought in people who are non-Rotarians to advise us on the best way to be more diverse. And so members of our community who don't look a lot like us, who traditionally haven't been in Rotary spaces sometimes, are advising us, and hopefully maybe they're full, doesn't get to be in the club and want to join us eventually, but that's one of the things that we're really focusing on. And they're helping us to provide programs during our meetings so that we make sure we are having very good, diverse programs and that people are realizing the issues that they may not know about because of their own privilege.
Anyone else? That's a fantastic answer though. I think if you don't have immediate diverse members who are willing to join, going out and seeking people to come to your club to speak on DEI is a fantastic way to kind of mitigate that.
Yeah, I think, echoing what the other speakers have said, our club is making an effort to be more aware of our blind spots through a survey that having some members feel like that they're sort of outside of the realm of moving up or taking a leadership role was a big concern to a lot of us. And then also that guests or visitors or new Rotarians feel included. And so oftentimes, a guest might, especially coming out of Zoom, a guest might be alone at a table by themselves. And, because everyone is so involved with their own conversations or catching up with folks that they don't recognize that. So we just consider that a blind spot.
So I like that term blind spot. I think it's an important one. And the question it raises for me is, how do you know what you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So how do you uncover those blind spots in order to then address them?
Maybe say the club.
Sure. Charles McClemens, President-elect of Madison, Wisconsin. We're currently doing there's a group locally that's called Step Up Equity Matters. And they're doing a variety of trainings. And we chose their unconscious bias training for our board of directors and leadership. And it's packed with 5 modules. And so that's one way of doing it. It's very well designed, it's experiential, and it makes people aware of their blind spots.
For those of you who said you have a DEI committee at your local club, I'm going to call out some years and how long in existence it's been. Have any of your Rotary Club's DEI committees been in existence for more than a year?
2 years.
More than 2 years? 4 years? 5 years? How long has your committee been? 5 years. Okay, so these are youthful committees, we'll call them. So they are still growing, which means that there is continuous room for improvement. There's obviously been some societal triggers that have probably encouraged the development of these committees. And no matter how terrible those circumstances may have been, this is one of the positives that came out of that, is the fact that we are much more aware of the need for these types of committees. Yes?
So, what we're doing, in our district, actually, what we did was we did a survey where we actually ask people, basically, what are you? How do you identify? Because since Rotary International does not take that information, and if your goal is to be more like the community you are in, you don't know where you need to improve until you know who you have. So we sent that out to every club in our district through our DEI committee. We got some pushback, a couple emails were quite interesting. And the district DEI chair, those emails were quite interesting. One of which was, oh, you're a right wing, whatever, I might be Rotary. Okay, you know, yeah. All your liberal ideas are not part of Rotary. I might leave Rotary. Yeah. Those were one of the many comments I received. But we just felt that was the first step because, like I said, you can't grow and know who's in your clubs, how your clubs reflect the community that you're in. Because you can go on a city website and find out who's in your community, who's in your city. But if you can't do the same thing for your own club, then how do you know where you're lacking and how you can improve upon that until you ask the question. And then we also ask questions about how included people felt and why they didn't or did not feel included. Because we do have a lot of, like people were saying, there are a lot of people that are constantly tapped for the same positions. Like I told my district, I said, y'all recycle the same 15 people for district leadership. Period. I was like, you have 400, almost 300 something clubs, but y'all can only find 15 people in the state of Illinois to be on the district leadership. I said, this is utterly ridiculous. I said, these are the questions, this is why we have to ask this question. I said, because I feel that way. I feel like if you're not in the club, then you're not on district leadership. And our district leadership is actually majority women, so it's not a woman issue, but none of them are black, but two. And I'm just like, that's ridiculous. None of them are under 50. That's ridiculous, except for the district governor's daughter. And I know, I love Amy, she's great. And I know that's not why she's there, because she's very, she does her job well. But when that's what you see as an outsider looking in, what expectation do other people see? And so, and I think that's what we need to push forward, especially in a large club, when you're looking at 500 members, granted, my club only has 140. But when you look at a large club like that, and when people come in and they look at you, what do they see? Who do they see? And how do you improve upon that to make them want to be included, make them feel that they will have equity in your club?
That's a great point on the simple fact of representation, right? You have to see yourself in the position to be able to really expand on bringing in new members who will also see themselves in that position, want to join for more than just, the sake of joining, but also to take on positions of leadership within their own community. And it's a great segue to our next point in terms of the survey that was sent out. Do we have one more question?
Yeah, and I guess you're probably getting there, so you can come back to it later. But I'm just curious how you balance, as you think about large clubs and getting younger, diverse members in leadership positions. But by design, you have to be in the club for years before you get into a leadership position. Our club is expedited by about a year, but you still have to be, before you can serve as president, I think you have to be in for 7 years. Not an intentional number, but when you do the math, you got to do all these other prerequisites. And so I'm curious how the other clubs sort of balance that tradition and history and longevity and all of that with DEI goals to say we also want to be more diverse.
Right, and that's one of the points that President Jennifer Jones made in that article was the fact that we do need to advance younger members into leadership roles so that they can attain the requirements to eventually sit on the board or other positions of leadership. And she mentions very explicitly that we need to treat these new members with the same respect that you're treating long-term members. And I think those are key elements to really advancing it. I can't speak to the 7-year requirement. That's something for our board to tackle, and maybe our president can speak to that.
Well, and I could say, that is the case for us as well, essentially. In order to be president, you have to have served on our board, which is a 3-year term, and have to have been off the board for 1 year. So already there's 4 years. And then in order to be on the board, you have to have been in the club for 3 years. So you add that up, you get elected president after 7 years, you're probably not serving until your 9th year at least. I've been in the club for 16 years and I'm president now. When I was at RI in Houston, I was sitting next to someone from Boston who asked, goes, oh, you're an incoming president. How long have you been in Rotary? I said, 16 years. They said, wait, and you're only becoming president now? And he had been in his club for 8 years, and he was on his 2nd time being president. Which these are questions that our DEI committees should be asking. Do we need to relax some of those policies in terms of our next generation of members? And not just, it's not just new members, but looking at within our clubs, our existing membership, how can we advance them into leadership roles? It's like the saying about a tree. The best time to, put some diversity into your club was yesterday. The second best time is today. So if we can start promoting those leaders right now, we're planting those seeds for the next 3, 4, 5, hopefully not 7 years, but we'll get there.
I think that a missing component is also, you mentioned knowing the history of Rotary Club. I still feel very much like a new member. Joined Rotary during the height of the pandemic as a Zoom attendee for a good part of it, or at least my initial introduction, which left gaps in my personal education about Rotary and how accepting a chair position might happen, how proposing a new committee might occur, and even the intricacies of being a new member who gets assigned or accepts the pleasure of serving as a chair, and is met with some pushback because I don't look like the typical Rotarian chair for any committee, much less one that has maybe been in existence and has been led by the same person for a really long time. So those issues will naturally keep occurring as you diversify your club, and what we hope to do is give you some tools and some examples of how we've handled it here in a relatively diverse area and how you can take those back to your own clubs and see if they're a good fit or whether they need to be manipulated to fit better within yours. And again, the big thing to consider is the needs of your club specifically, and this does involve some hard conversations, and you're going to hear from members who maybe don't want to diversify because they like the way things are and change is hard. And how you approach that says more about your club than it does about those individuals, and I think how you handle it is going to be really what's going to shine a light on diversity efforts within your club and thus your community, right? So for us, the conversation about a DEI committee happened while conversing about a different committee and how we wanted to really kick up our social media presence and engagement. However, social media is, or at least was, a young man's game, pardon the gender norms. But it came to the attention of the people sitting at the table that if we were going to make a push in the social media sphere, we really needed to consider what we were putting out and how our community was going to receive it. That we were doing great things in our community, but we weren't highlighting it. And as a result, we were still being seen as an old, white, rich man's club that didn't allow space for people of color, for people of diverse backgrounds, for people with unique views on the world. And so that conversation rubbed some folks the wrong way, but ultimately we came to the conclusion that there should be a DEI committee. If our effort was to diversify the club, why wasn't there one in existence in our San Jose Rotary Club? And so it took a little bit of time, but eventually then President Steve Borkenhagen kind of pulled together our league of potential committee members and really kind of hit on the fact that this was a club that needed this because of rising issues as a direct result of diversifying our members. We put together a couple of really loose goals, but we did take a look at what was already in existence. So before the pandemic, we had a ad hoc committee that was looking at DEI efforts within our club specifically, and they had a list of potential goals and ideas, things that they were trying to bring to fruition. We had a DEI statement, and we really didn't want to throw out that entire plan. It still had great value, but in the light of the pandemic, the BLM movement, there was just some updating that needed to naturally happen. And that's kind of where we started. And as far as who was to chair that committee, it was a matter of looking at those who already kind of had a foothold in the DEI sphere. And so it wasn't so much that we were looking specifically for someone who was going to drive all of the efforts, but rather someone who could assess what those efforts needed to be for this year, because we were still in ad hoc at the time. We might still be. But we really needed to assess what could be done in 1 year. We had a really short time goal of what we wanted to do and whether we could accomplish it during that president's year. And so that's how deciding on the chairs kind of came about. And then we came to the idea that there were some specific issues that were brought to our attention. So a small sensitive issue here, we were really early and people started hearing about how our DEI committee was coming together and who was on it, and what we were hoping to do was not fully understood. But there were issues around some gender, like not quite sexual assault, but there was some instances where there was some fringing of those lines. And a couple of women came forward and said, you know, I want to talk to you. I heard you're on this DEI committee, and I feel like this event that happened and I was at, X person said this thing to me, and it made me feel uncomfortable, and I wanted to bring that to your attention. They didn't want action taken, but they wanted to notify me that that was happening as chair of this new committee. This all happened within maybe 2 weeks of attending the very first meeting with then President Steve. It happened again at the next Rotary meeting I attended with another woman coming forward. And then we had our wonderful Women in Rotary event, and other issues arose at that event that leaned more towards some racial biases being put in place or performative actions being done in an effort to represent diversity without really taking the steps to diversify. And so these conversations started naturally occurring, and so as a committee, we reassessed kind of what our goals would be and how we could really address these rapidly rising issues that were being brought not just to my attention, but other members of the committee who then relayed them to me. And so while our needs assessment survey didn't really happen in a paper format, those that were willing to speak out and come forward and talk to me or other members of the committee about it really kind of drove what our more actionable items were going to be for the committee as a whole.
I was gonna ask, could you detail what our 3 action plans or goals were?
Yeah. So those 3 actions that kind of came out of that were that we wanted to update our DEI statement just to reflect new, more inclusive language, really try and take what was done in 2018 by that committee that started this effort and bring it to our 2022 standards, taking into consideration that a lot happened in that time frame that really drove forward these efforts. A big one for us is identifying a speaker that can really address Rotary-specific issues. We've had great speakers talk about diversifying the workforce, talk about bringing in new membership and how you can implement great DEI initiatives, but the issues that we're facing in Rotary as a result of diversification efforts are still there. And those haven't been uniquely addressed, so that's been one of our bigger kind of hassles, is trying to find a speaker who can come in, capture an audience, while also speaking to these smaller issues, to these other issues in Rotary that keep popping up. And those include some terms that a lot of our Rotarians aren't necessarily familiar with. And those are biases, microaggressions, harassment, they're really familiar with, that term's been around a while. But performative DEI efforts, that's not something that people really come across, at least if you're the usual Rotarian member. And having to explain that to people and tell them what that is after the Women in Rotary event was a new term for a lot of folks. And so we want someone who can speak to these in a way that our audience will receive, as well as a way that won't rub folks the wrong way. We want it to be a positive conversation. So finding the right speaker for that has been a little bit of an uphill battle, but I think our speaker committee is doing a great job and they've narrowed it down to one person, but I'm gonna hold off. Karen?
Irma, have you come around here and asked what performative DEI is? Can you explain?
Apologies, few people surrounding us have asked what performative is. Can you explain that briefly?
Yeah, so these terms are really, it's not that they're new, it's just that we finally have the right language to describe what they are after people have suffered through these specific issues on repeat. And so performative DEI conveys a commitment to DEI without ever really assigning policy or action. It's essentially talking the talk and not walking the walk.
It's when you make a committee that doesn't do anything, it doesn't have any responsibility and doesn't have any authority to make any changes, that would be performance. Or interrupting the chair of that committee.
At least as your president. That's definitely one of the key issues that we've kind of faced is that we're having these amazing DEI-driven events and these activities that welcome people from outside of our club. And we've made these efforts to diversify our club, and then when these two parties meet, there's this idea of, well, if I just take a picture with someone of color, and I post it, then I am diverse, I am diversifying. And so that is where that's why I included it here, is because at our Women in Rotary event, there was an incident where folks were just kind of scouting the room for any possible appearances of diversity, taking pictures, and then not really following up to engage with people. And the event was meant to be this kind of sisterhood moment. Let's talk about how much we've included women in Rotary and how we hope to continue that mission. And looking around the room, we certainly had a great representation of our surrounding community. But to have that be outweighed by this negative occurrence of performative DEI really hindered how well people felt, or at least those people who knew about it felt about the event. It adds a blemish to what would have been a stellar event. Questions in the back?
Even the most well-intentioned person who is bringing this up and speaking about these issues can use language that isn't that if you're not trained to talk the language, sometimes you can get yourself in trouble. Do you know, is there any Rotary International material, training material or videos to share with the club that have been done professionally and that can help to show implicit bias and privilege?
So Rotary International did their own survey where they assessed kind of diversity efforts and how diverse these clubs were. And they created a couple of videos talking about the results of that survey. It doesn't offer the most at-length description or definitions for these instances, but it does give you a solid understanding of a needs assessment within Rotary and how we're trying to, on an international level, get people to understand that DEI is going to happen, and this is kind of how you fit into that spectrum as a member. But I do agree, a video that kind of, essentially, sensitivity training video that fits into Rotary's needs.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Hoffman, and I am from Lincoln, Nebraska. So let me share with you, I originally came from the Philippines. So I was with Rotaract for 10 years. So I moved to Nebraska with 6% population of Asian community. So obviously, I am in the minority. Now when I moved there, I basically just knew my husband and his 3 siblings. But because of my foundation of Rotary, when I was still young, when I moved to Nebraska, I thought, the only place I can find the finest men and women will be at Rotary. And so when I was not worried at all. And so I did not even worry like I'm a minority. I wasn't worried at all. I just felt like this is where I will go. So I think Rotary should have an intentional focus in adding value to Rotary membership. And so that would go back to my suggestion. I think all Rotary clubs should invest in young people and focus on providing value to Rotary membership. And I'm experiencing that. It is very effective with me, and I am benefiting from it. Thank you.
I think marketing does have a space in DEI efforts, and we certainly want to see that. It's just something that I don't think Rotary has really put a lot of effort behind yet, because it hasn't necessarily needed to. It's always been kind of on referral basis. We don't do a lot of tabling events, but the opportunity to do that also requires you to look at where should you table? Where do you want to recruit from? What communities are you looking at recruiting in? And how do you make sure that when you go into those communities, you're doing an effective job of reaching those people in a way that they will receive well? And so, again, the representation element, you want to send people who look like members of that community, but if you don't have Rotarians who look like those members of the community, who do you send in their stead? I'll leave that as an open question. In the back.
Lisa Borelli again with the National Club. We don't have a DEI committee, but it lives at the board level for us. And Joanna was discussing, she's been in a lot longer than I have, and it started well over probably 10 years ago, and the intentionality. And it's important as you start to diversify. Number one, it comes to recruiting. And I watch new members get introduced week after week after week, and I'm so proud of the variety and diversity in all walks. The CEO for the LGBT Chamber, for instance, is a member. And then when you start to, in Nashville, we have a huge university population, for instance. We have a huge healthcare. If you look at the fabric of what makes up our community, and those are the people we seek out. So government folks, a lot of entrepreneurs, we go into the academic world, we go into the businesses, and so many of the people that are front-facing for our bigger companies in the community are diverse, because that's what those companies are trying to create. And so if you think about, you've got to look at your community different, and we are not a club that says you must be the CEO to be in the club. We want engaged, thoughtful members, and it's evolved over time. And having strong, diverse members that will have a very honest conversation with you, especially at that board level, and challenged us year after year after year. And the comment made earlier around sort of obstacles that blocked getting diversity into your board and into the president's chair. We broke those down years ago, and I would take our board and take our past presidents especially, and we've had a district governor, African-American woman, and she's my go-to. She's our lightning rod. She will be our compass to make sure we're heading in the right direction, because she challenges us. And when we sit down and we plan each year and we think about committee chairs, we are literally thinking through, are we getting diversity in thought, in all of these other considerations, and it makes us a better club. But for us, it has to live at the board and leadership level to make it happen every day. And we live in a community, fortunately, that has a lot of diversity, and so it's easy to find strong leaders that are diverse.
Yeah, so it being at the board level is certainly a space in which it can live in if you have that, I guess, that bandwidth within your board. Our board might be spread a little bit thin, given all of these events happening this year, including this one here. And so it fell on the committee in this case, and it was a natural fit given that we were bringing in a big amount of diverse members as red badges or new members. Does everyone call red badges?
I don't know. Is
Does
everyone
everyone call new members red badgers?
Yeah, we do.
Red badgers equals new members. Question in the back.
Hi, Lee Taylor, Executive Director of the Downtown Louisville Kentucky Rotary Club. I have a funny story. So when I became a Rotarian, I did not intend to be Executive Director. That was an accident, or a failure to say no on my part. But when I joined Rotary, I looked around the room and didn't see as much diversity as is represented in our Louisville community. So that kind of became my goal for my role as a Rotarian, was to increase the diversity in the room and on our stage. So I was going around inviting everybody I saw to come to Rotary, and I was specifically trying to find people that I felt would bring some level of diversity on some level to our club. And so it was funny, I went up to this woman, very attractive African-American woman, and I was like, I would love for you to be my guest at Rotary. And she just looked at me and she said, I'm the president-elect. So I didn't, and it turns out that, I don't know if y'all heard of Jean West, she's an Emmy Award-winning reporter, and anyway, so I just didn't grow up in Louisville, didn't watch the news, so I didn't know who she was, so I doubled down on, like I didn't even know who she was. Anyway, that was funny, but my point is that a lot of the Rotarians in our club don't necessarily move in daily circles where there are a lot of diverse people. And so it's really hard to become a diverse club if you're just sitting there waiting for them to show up, right? So I intentionally went out to places where I knew there, meetings and organizations and networking events in other parts of town where I knew there would be different people that I usually cross paths with. And then I used LinkedIn. I know it's going to sound really weird, but I have over 6,200 connections on LinkedIn right now. I didn't to start with, but I went through and started looking for people that looked different than me, or that had, pronouns different than me. And I started sending them friend requests on LinkedIn. And then I started, once they accepted, I would invite them to Rotary, and same thing on Facebook, believe it or not. I would use Facebook the same way. And so my network of people different than me expanded greatly within the few months that I was in Rotary. And this was during the pandemic, so a lot more people were online, right? So it was easier because people would respond online, whereas they might not in other scenarios. But I made a list and I exported my LinkedIn contacts to Excel. And I went through and I set up columns, and to the extent that I could tell what category someone fit into by their photo or by what they put in their profile, I would categorize them and to see, who do I know and who is diverse in my network. And then my next focus, I somehow ended up on the speakers committee, and then I somehow ended up chair of the speakers committee. And my next thing was, I want diverse speakers on the stage. So I made a list of 125 people that I thought had something to say. And again, I set up the columns in Excel, and I indicated, do they fit in one of these categories? And then we were very intentional about trying to reach out to those people and invite them to our stage. So I think sometimes you just, back to the earlier intent was one of the first speakers. I think you really just have to get down to the details and be very intentional about figuring out who those people are, and then figuring out how you can connect with them, and then inviting them, and then once they come, of course, then I gotta go around and introduce them so that they feel included and welcome, and then I gotta invite them back. It's just a constant process.
It is, and I was a little weary at the beginning of that, where you were just blanket recruiting, as many diverse individuals from social media as you could. But I'm glad that spreadsheets came to the rescue and kind of helped you narrow down that, there's people who are the right fit for Rotary, and people who maybe wouldn't be interested in a club that focuses on what we do, or even committing the time, right? So you took a really large pool of potential applicants and narrowed it down and honed in on their skill set and how they could contribute, as well as how they would receive Rotary. So it wasn't performative.
Right. No, it's really like any pipeline, right? right? You start with a big pool, and then you narrow them through the funnel. But the other thing that we did, I wanted to mention, is we offer a free 3-month membership to Rotary for any minority business owner or diverse business owner. So it doesn't really cost us anything. They get to be a member of Rotary for 90 days. And then at the end, if they choose to apply to join, then they go through the regular process. But then we also have an emerging leader membership, which is much cheaper than our normal rate, and that allows their people that are under 40 to participate in our club, and that's a way to draw them in as well, whereas they might not normally meet the criteria of being in a C-suite, but they're an emerging leader.
That's a huge component to bringing in new members and young members. I don't know each individual club's dues, but I can tell you that it's an incredibly strong deterrent for young individuals who are barely kicking into their career, and to be told that in order to participate in a club that is community service driven, they need to shell out what is a quarter of rent in this area. And so that 90-day kind of free trial of Rotary sounds like a highly lucrative element for bringing in new membership. And I encourage other clubs to take that information back with them and look at if that is a possibility. I love free trials. I love free things.
A question?
Yes.
Michael Brucker from San Diego. So I mentioned earlier I spent a lot of time in nonprofit work as an executive director, but before that, I was a basketball coach. So I came to San Diego in 1980, coached basketball at San Diego State, from Detroit originally, where I was assistant coach with the Pistons, and at the University of Detroit, worked with Nicky B for 6 years. So I understand the importance of recruiting. All right, I understand that. I also know too, the Kentucky Derby was never won with a mule. So I think it's really important that if we're going to recruit for Rotary, we will recruit the right people for exactly what we're looking for. But I also challenge all of us too to do one important thing, and that's to serve down the street. Because I know Rotarians in our club, when we go, we build hospitals in Africa. We've had soccer tournaments in very diverse communities throughout San Diego County. And those Rotarians that don't look like the folks we're serving are allies and doing it in a very positive way. And when that community sees Rotarians in that light, they want to know more. They want to join. And I think that's the segue into getting into the communities. Be sure you're doing that kind of work, and when you do, it's going to pay dividends for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I will caveat that the first time I heard about Rotary was because a local club used to meet at a restaurant that my dad was a dishwasher in. And he would clean up plates after lunch, and they wore funny hats, he told me, and they gave him a free shirt. And that was really the first exposure I had to Rotary, and there's now photos of my dad wearing like a Rotary shirt and like a Rotary hat, and he has no idea what they were doing or what until he eventually took on ownership of the restaurant he was picking up plates in, and started to have conversations with Rotarians in the area, and really kind of found out that they were a community service agency that were helping the community in several different efforts, and that he didn't fully understand those meetings, but he knew that the outcome of those meetings had a positive effect on his very own community. So yes, seeing people doing good, even if you don't understand how they do it, has a paramount effect. Because when I was approached to join Rotary, like Karen Philbrick, president-elect, and my first reaction was, I don't know, it's weird, and I don't know enough about it, and I don't know if I can, I guess, contribute in a way that is expected of me. But sitting in on those first few meetings and kind of discussing with people on a more personal level, attending committee meetings and hearing what they were trying to do and how I could potentially contribute to those meetings really encouraged me to stay in Rotary, even though there wasn't a 90-day free trial. So.
And the leader.
That's right.
Sarju, I wanted to, because you've been a little quiet. It's against your nature.
It is against my nature.
It's against your nature. But what you may not know too much about Sarju is that, he is part of our very large contingent of lawyers at Rotary. So you're not part of our diversity professional, I would say. You're definitely in the plurality there. Can you tell us a little bit about your Rotary experience? Because you have not been in the club for ages and ages as I have.
More of a joke.
What was it like for you coming in, and what did you see?
So, it's interesting. I started attending Rotary events, typically the gala, and I think I'd been to maybe a barbecue or two before I became a member. And one of the motivators for me to join the organization was seeing that the room seemed to lack color. And I do come from a place of privilege professionally. You know, I've achieved a certain amount in my life just through good fortune and my family upbringing and whatnot. When I walk into a room, I don't necessarily think of myself as looking different from others. And that's an advantage that I have, and that's not a lot of folks have that, and they're not gonna feel comfortable. I feel comfortable for the most part. So I'm coming to Rotary events saying, you know, this organization needs more color, they need more representation, and so I think this would be a good organization for me. And of course, I did know people in the room, and I wanted to know more of the people in the room, and I wanted to become more civically engaged in my community as well. But I saw it as an opportunity. Let me come in. It's funny because I still struggle to find my voice within Rotary. That's something that I'm still working on. I'm becoming more involved. But yeah, to Sal's point, I joined right before the pandemic, so it's only been about 3 years, and the majority of that has been online. But that's been my experience. I was welcomed in, and I see as one of my contributions now is to be seeking out those in the community who also represent greater diversity, different walks of life. People not just racially, and not just gender, but also socioeconomic status as well. And let's bring greater representation into the room, because I think we're all going to benefit from that. The point was made earlier about blind spots, and I think that's the thing. You walk into a Rotary meeting, and there's a lot of friends there. These people who've known each other for many, many years, and there's a lot of checks being written. That can be super intimidating for a younger person or a newer member walking in. Saying, I don't have those sorts of funds to just be writing checks. What can I add? Right. So those are always questions, I think, for newer members, and those are the types of things that I want to be thinking about, and I think we need to be thinking about this at the club level. Figure out, okay, how do we make sure we're not alienating folks through our normal interactions? Hey, I'm going to save this chair for my friend, so that, when the new member comes in and says, "Oh, can I sit here?" "Oh, no, I got someone coming." Those sorts of things are impactful, right? It makes you feel like, oh, I don't quite belong. Not everyone's able to overcome that. So, paying attention to those sorts of things, that's part of what I try to do when I attend meetings is, are we being inclusive? Who is missing? What do we need, and how do we go about getting those folks?
Partly to Sarju's point, to jump in here, how many of you, as large clubs, we're not, the 25-member clubs can move around a lot. They're very nimble. But larger clubs, one of the challenges we have is we tend to break up into cliques. So how many of your clubs have like a table, like a professional table, like a doctor's table or a judge's table or a banker's table or something? Because those are the kinds of things where you have to figure out how to get your members to mix with each other in ways that they're not necessarily comfortable with. And that's something we've been trying to challenge ourselves. In the past, pre-pandemic, we would have things like a red badge member, a new member, would be assigned to sit at each table and break up some of those cliques. We would hand out playing cards, and people had to sit with new people based on what their card said. Did people love it? No, they did not. Did it help for that week in getting them to talk to people that they would not normally sit with? It sure did. So, and that can be very encouraging for a new member or maybe a quieter member who's not really outgoing to get into those conversations.
Yeah, I definitely, strolling into a Rotary Club where I knew one person, and due to an incredibly busy lifestyle, wasn't always available to join me. I definitely have had the circumstance that Sarju mentions where you go to sit with maybe someone who you know because of your one contact, and then that seat is taken. And it's really easy to see those cliques that Sal's talking about, where you see like the same friends on repeat at the same table. That's their table, and you can't sit there unless they ask you to. It's very what my generation would call very Mean Girls. You guys seen that movie? But it definitely had that feel where you weren't allowed to sit with the cool kids, and you need to go find your seat with the outer, let's say the outer parts of our conference room, and hope that there was enough space there for you. So if you see the deer in the headlights Rotarian walking around or getting too much water, it's something I use often in a room. I'm so full of water when I'm uncomfortable because I go back and get multiple cups of water until I find a place to sit from getting those multiple cups of water. And so if you see that happening, invite the person to sit next to you. It is a quick, easy way to make a new friend, but also a quick, easy way to show that your club is inclusive to new members.
And is that a good segue? Oh, we got a question?
How would you actually recommend
Lauren from Denver, how would you actually recommend potentially breaking up that table? Our club, for example, has exactly what you just said, and we have that table, and it is a bunch of gentlemen that have been members of the club for many, many years, and they are set in their ways and have been hostile to new members and have made, we have found out that they have made some discriminatory comments to prospective members who ended up not becoming a member because of that. So what would your recommendation be to actually kind of break up that table without telling these members that we're gonna kick you out pretty soon if this continues? What's the way to do that?
So that is a fantastic segue to the third goal of our committee, which was a direct result of instances similar, not immediately like that one, but similar to that, where there was clear instances of members who were breaching that code of conduct that Rotary sent out fairly recently as well, earlier this year, and kind of specified what that code of conduct meant for each Rotarian and how we had to commit to that code of conduct as kind of the way that we guided ourselves. We have a 4-way test, but this kind of gave a little bit more meat to those statements. And it was I would say one of the more challenging approaches to take. There's a lot of words up there, I'm just gonna talk about it. But essentially it was about incident reporting and how you handle that and how someone who has violated that code of conduct should be approached and by whom. And so there's a couple of bullet points there on what the code of conduct is, and really quickly, it is essentially just being a respectful individual to all those in Rotary and how you can foster inclusive, welcoming spaces, both personally and as a whole club. But it recommended a couple of different options in terms of incidents that may arise, and it included being able to talk to the person one-on-one and who should do that, and in the instance of it being someone in this, we'll call it a boys club for lack of a better word, phrase. But if it is these Rotarians who were there, since women weren't allowed in there, people of color probably weren't allowed in there, and they're set in their ways, who's better to approach them than someone who maybe they respect? And oftentimes that is going to be someone who fits that same mold, who looks like them, sounds like them, comes from a similar background, but maybe has a more open idea of what Rotary can be in 2022. And so approaching them and asking them to help mitigate that situation and talk to them about the efforts that Rotary is trying to do to diversify membership and make a more inclusive environment and equitable opportunities, and how closing themselves off and making these types of derogatory comments to new members is acting against those goals, is really a way to try and facilitate that conversation. We have had instances of this in our own club, and people will sit around a table and have a conversation with this individual. Sometimes that ends up being the president himself, and if it needs to be elevated to that level, the president, him or her, can step in and and be kind of the voice of reason in those instances, but I do believe that it should be an effort, not on one-on-one, maybe if it's a volatile situation, but it should be an effort within the club and its members to try and address it first. But there is that kind of follow-up where does it need to go to the board? Does it need to go to a Rotary International level to really address the problem that this one individual or few individuals are creating for this club's growth and continuation? Because ultimately, if more people find out that you're excluding members of a specific race, gender, or their own beliefs, then you're going to lose membership abroad, on a broad spectrum. I don't want to be part of a club that doesn't include a specific individual because of who they are. So there's a question in the middle row.
And I was just going to ask Sal Gay from San Jose if you would mention your coffee with Sal, because I think a lot of good things come out of it.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done to try to bring in new members, or not just new members, but re-engage our overall membership, is before our meetings, I try to get together a small group of members just to have coffee, no agenda. We just sit, talk, mostly to introduce, because they know who I am, but I'm getting them to introduce themselves to each other. And a lot of times this group, which is usually about 5 or 6 people, will end up just staying at the same table together and continuing their conversations when I have to go up and start leading the meeting. So that's been one way that I've been able to sort of draw people out. And I'm hoping that I can continue that, and that's something that people can get used to and really look forward to.
I'm Kirk from Fort Worth, Texas. Just to add to your comments on discussing those issues, when you have members like that are against that is a crucial conversation that absolutely needs to happen. The bottom line, all of our clubs, any type of these networking social clubs, it's cynical. Membership is harder and harder to get. These clubs that continue to hold out and say, well, we're not going to diversify, they're going to die. That's the bottom line. Because the younger people coming in, the attitudes are not the same. They are a more diverse group. The millennials growing up, they are not about any of that. And when you lose that membership, it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years, but these clubs that continue to hold out, I personally think they're going to die very soon.
Yeah,
And that's something that you need to argue with your club. That this is why we have to put a stop to that.
It's a really good point. The organization goes through an evolution, just as society goes through an evolution. And we heard just during the luncheon about Rotary inviting women for the first time in 1986, I believe was the year. That's unimaginable today, right? Can you imagine that there was a time that Rotary didn't allow women? It just doesn't compute for us in today's society. And yet, the person I was sitting with at lunch said, there are people in this room who voted against that, right? And that's true. It's just reality. Those were the times. And we've moved along. We have to move with the times. And who are we as an organization has changed as well. We're much more inclusive. It doesn't pass the 4-way test. It doesn't meet the standards of what we want our membership to be in Rotarian. So those are difficult conversations to have, and they're difficult decisions to make. But I think it requires being bold in our positions with situations like that, where those folks need to be confronted. They need to be spoken with about how their actions are counter to the objectives and mission of this organization. And those that are not willing to adapt, they have to go.
And as leaders of large clubs, again, bringing this analogy that we've got very large ships that we're captains of. All of us in this room, we're leaders of these large clubs, and we want to maintain our membership because that's how we thrive, but we have to make sure that these clubs and these members are espousing what Rotary International is saying is its values. And how many of you were at RI in Houston this year? Okay. I went to the DEI breakout there, and one comment that stuck with me was, if we start making these DEI policies, if we start enforcing these policies, if we start trying to become more diverse clubs, aren't we going to lose members? And the answer was, yeah, you might lose members. You're not going to lose Rotarians. So think about that. Remember that the people that we may lose, well, maybe Rotary isn't for them anymore.
Right.
That was really good, Sal. Say it one more time.
You may lose members, you won't lose Rotarians.
We have a few questions in the back.
Scott?
I don't know if this is really a question, but I've been working on this issue for a couple of decades in different starts, and we have found that it's a very slow process. And so it's required a lot of patience. We do have a complimentary membership of 6 months that we really put in recently. But we're trying to look at, and we're developing relationships with a couple of organizations in town, but it's difficult. It's a challenge to recruit organization to organization. Like, we're historically, we invite one person at a time, so we're learning it as we go. Our membership in the last 5 years, we've gone from 10% people of color to 13%, which is slow, but it's going in the right direction. And for women, it's gone from, I think, 33% to 37%. So our board, makeup this year, was overweight, so we have 43% women and 30% people of color on the board. So we're making efforts as we can. But one thing that we're doing, that we just started to do, that I think is worth thinking about for other organizations or other clubs, is looking at where our charitable dollars go and ensuring that at the very least we have alignment of values. And we believe that 93% of our dollars are really going to either directly impact the understanding or the change of structural racism in our community, or it are going to organizations that have very strong alignment with our values for diversity and inclusion. And we haven't started communicating that to our members yet, but I think we're looking for how the best way to do that, but I think that's part of who we are and what we want to be in the community as well, as standing for it, not just in the club, but outside the community and putting our money where our mouth is. We also do have speaker color every month, so we're trying to making sure our podium is increasingly diverse as well, including more voices from the community to the club.
Slow growth is still growth. So, I mean, you're saying it wasn't a big percentage growth, but ultimately that looks very different in a room, especially considering some folks don't come to the actual meetings. But if you can make the room look like the community that you're serving and have diverse people, when you bring these guests in, it does have an impact. I see that happening at our own Rotary Club, where when there are more people who look diverse and look like the guests that are being brought in, there is a stronger inclination to repeat that visit. And I don't know how many free guest visits our club allows, but there's a huge capacity in seeing yourself in the room. And as a guest coming in, I can see that there's an interest in wanting to see why these people who look like me and speak like me or have a background like me are in this room and what has kept them in there. So small growth is still growth. In the back.
Joanne is part of the national group, president-elect. So one of the things I wonder from you all is, have you seen the effective use of a natural partner in this work, which is corporations? So a little bit about that. I also serve in our DEI steering committee for the company. I work for a large healthcare company. And one of the pillars of the DEI work is community. And it's actually the pillar that gets everyone really enthusiastic about the groups throughout the company. And so we all work in big cities, and those corporations are in big cities, and they're looking to engage their colleagues in the community, and with organizations like Rotary Committed to Service and Fellowship. So
Do you think we're underutilizing that resource?
Probably, yes, I would think so. I mean, I think any partnerships that we can make within the business world that go into communities would be, help make us stronger on diversity.
Yeah, I think these large club projects, right, provide a huge opportunity to really find the right partner for those projects, and oftentimes allow for opportunities of engagement that otherwise aren't readily available with these big corporations. So I believe we had a project fall through, but there was an opportunity to also partner with a healthcare provider and create a clinic that would address some needs in our community for low income or folks from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And that provided a unique instance of being able to partner with a very large corporation and find a way to bring them into Rotary and see if it was a good fit for some of their, in this case, probably C-suite level members, but also it has a trickle down effect where, you know, employees at the entry level will also hear about these community service acts and see if it was somewhere they'd want to get involved in.
Let me preface this by saying I'm an executive director, and I'm an executive director who's been here since God was child. So let me preface that. And y'all may throw stuff at me, but I feel the need to say it. I am all for this. I don't want anybody to infer that I am not all in the instance that we need to diversify our clubs and do everything to appear more welcoming. That is without question true. But there is a place for those 80-year-old men that are sitting at the table, paying their dues every single month and don't want to talk to anybody else. We have to be welcoming to everybody, and that includes those people that only see Rotary as their social event of the week. They're never going to do your service projects. They're never going to do, they're not. But they have been there for 50 years, and God love them, let them do it.
We're not kicking members out just because they don't agree with our views, like off the bat. That's not the approach we're going for. From my understanding, that may change if they violate the code of conduct, you know, and how much leeway we offer them is really on a case-by-case basis, and how we handle that as a club is also on a case-by-case basis for each of you. And I can't speak for everyone, but I do know that we have the opportunity to engage with that person or not to engage with them. And if members of the club are choosing not to engage with them on a personal level, but the club as a whole does, then again, that's on a case-by-case basis, and it involves having some autonomy on how your members want to be perceived.
There was a conversation about how we break up this table. I think it relates to the comment about, you know, there's a place for these people. I had said to my team from Toledo, Kevin from Toledo, I'm not breaking up that table because I don't want new members coming in sitting with those folks. And there is a place for those people who've been in the club that don't believe in our forward-thinking vision, and that place is McDonald's at 7 a.m. They also serve coffee. It's not a Rotary meeting. So I'm happy for them to find a new place. I guess what I wanted, the comment I wanted to make as it relates to corporate, is these corporations are struggling with the same thing we are. They're having the same conversations we are, and what the idea that sort of popped in my head is how do we lean on those companies? And it requires some of the clubs in this room to, I'll say, quote, lower the bar on who we allow in, right? It isn't just C-suite, but if you went to those executives and corporate partners and corporate members and asked them to appoint young, diverse talent to improve their networking, improve their communications, improve their relationships in the community, I gotta believe most of our corporate partners have people they're looking at. How do I move up in my company? And getting them involved in Rotary is exactly the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. A natural kind of space is the fact that the DEI field within corporations is growing exponentially as well. You know, nobody wants to be Nike, who, you know, had some hiccups in the Olympics. So they're trying to drive forward these DEI efforts on a greater scale, and so it would be worth the effort to reach out to those organizations and see if someone on their people and culture team or human resources team, whatever they're calling it, to come through and visit Rotary and see if there is kind of a natural symbiotic relationship that could occur between the two organizations.
Okay, I need to, I hear you. I love my 80-year-old people who write a check, but I will not sit there and tolerate just because you write a check every month, that you get to look at me and make assumptions about me, or you get to say whatever you feel you want to say about me, my race, or anything else, which I did. My first 2 months in Rotary, we had a speaker come in talking about the task force for the National Drug Administration, and he was showing these videos, and we were all like, wow, like, we really don't need to see a drug scene, but okay, it's great. And then another looked at me and my friends and my husband and said to me, oh, so you probably know about how this goes. Oh, because I'm black, I have to know what it's like to be arrested, or what it's like to be, I have no idea what you're speaking of. And those kind of people, regardless of if you write a check every month, are not Rotarians. That is not what I think a Rotarian is. And no, I don't necessarily want to put new members with them, but that's just how that day worked out. But I don't feel that that is fair to all concerned, that is what we're supposed to be about. And so I think that's a distinctive line. And we have some old people that sometimes I just always say, bless your heart. Every day, I got 3 people who cannot say my name correctly to save all of their lives. I am a letter to them every day of the week. And I go, yes, right, hi Jeff. You're not gonna get my name together. I realize it's okay. You don't mean harm. You're just old. It's all right. You know, but there's a difference. And at some point, we have to stop letting the old white man club that everyone says Rotary is and what we are, and show them who we really are and what we can really become. Because I've been in this club 8 years, and I still get people that come to me and say, you remember Rotary, that's the old white man's club. Why are you there? And it's almost a decade now. And so it's been this way for 119 years. We need to stop. At some point, we just need to stop.
I am Carolyn Floyd from Yakima, Washington, and the comment that I want to make is we have a committee, but a lot of the focus is on education. A lot of people of non-color don't understand, and they've taken the focus of education. So throughout the year, we celebrate Black History Month. We celebrate National Hispanic Heritage Month. We celebrate Native American Month. We celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Holiday Month. And we always have a speaker. And during that whole month, which we just started Hispanic Heritage Month last week, one of our Rotarians who is of that heritage gets up and tells their story. There is nothing, the last week with his story is, his parents immigrated from Mexico. He came at the age of 2 and told his dad's story about, what his dad had to overcome, what he did, how he had to fall back down, and how he made it work, and the fact that his dad was his hero. So we do that, and the committee also does historical perspectives. And so they did the first one on Juneteenth, and Rotarians came, we had a Zoom component, and I turn around and there's teenagers in the room. So they're there to learn. And we have one on Wednesday, and the topic is why youth construction matters. And so it's about educating, because if you don't know, if you know, maybe you can change some minds and you can change the way people think. So that's it.
Yeah, I think education is a good first step. And it really does depend on where your club is. There's a spectrum of where all of our clubs are on the DEI scale. And some clubs, it is education. Others, we're moving towards, trying to deal with microaggressions. So I think it's different for everyone, which is Rotary.